What if everything you know about history is a lie? Not a mistake. Not a misunderstanding. A lie? Engineered. Calculated. Woven so seamlessly into the fabric of time that you never thought to question it. Until now. Buried beneath the sands of Sumer. Encoded in myths older than the Bible. Whispers of a race that walked the earth before the first pharaoh took his throne, before the first king raised his banner. They were here. Not gods. Not men. Something else. Something more. The Anunnaki. The architects of civilization. The unseen hands that shaped our origins. But they didn't just create mankind, they ruled us. Raised empires. Waged wars. Controlled bloodlines. Then, they vanished. Or so we were led to believe. What if they never left? What if their war never ended? The ruins of Sumer hold records older than history itself. Tablets inscribed with warnings, with battles that shook the heavens. A war between two factions, one determined to uplift humanity, the other set on enslaving it. The victors wrote the histories. The vanquished were erased. And the truth? Hidden. Locked away in coded scriptures and lost texts, in half-buried ziggurats and whispered legends. But the signs are resurfacing. Bloodlines still whisper their name. Megalithic structures defy explanation. Symbols of an empire long forgotten are etched into our DNA. And the world's elite, kings, presidents, secret societies, have always known. They keep their secrets close, guarding them like a sacred fire. Because if the truth got out, if you knew what they knew, civilization itself would fracture. History is not what you think it is. The gods of myth were not gods at all. And the war they fought? It never ended. It's been raging in the shadows, shaping the fate of nations, altering the course of human evolution. The question is, which side are you on? The air was thick with the weight of something ancient. Something unseen, yet watching. Beneath the relentless sun, the ruins of Sumer stood like shattered bones, their edges worn by time, their secrets sealed in the dust of forgotten empires. But they were never meant to be forgotten. A lone scholar kneels before a crumbling tablet, his fingers tracing the edges of a language older than any spoken today. His breath is shallow. His heart hammers against his ribs. Because the words carved into the stone whisper of something monstrous. Something real. They descended from the heavens, clothed in light, wielding the power of creation. The chisel marks are precise. Calculated. Left by hands that knew their meaning would outlast time itself. These were not myths. These were records. And they spoke of beings who walked among men, not as spirits, not as legends, but as rulers. Flesh and blood. With a purpose. With a will. With a war that never truly ended. They called them the Anunnaki. The gods of Sumer. The architects of civilization. The unseen forces behind the rise and fall of empires. Their names are scattered across history: Enki, the wise and cunning; Enlil, the ruthless and absolute; Anu, the silent and watching king above all. Statues of them still stand in museums, their stone eyes empty yet knowing. Forgotten by the world, but not gone. Never gone. Because history is not written by the victors. It is rewritten by those who fear the truth. For centuries, scholars dismissed the stories as poetic exaggerations, allegories for primitive minds trying to make sense of the world. But the more we dig, the more the earth refuses to lie. Monolithic structures defying human capability. Astronomical knowledge centuries ahead of its time. Genetic markers that should not exist. Every piece of evidence points back to them. The kings of old did not rule alone. They were chosen. Touched. Commanded. Their bloodlines, sacred. Their authority, unquestioned. Because they carried the whispers of gods in their veins. And then, they vanished. Not in death. Not in defeat. In secrecy. As if something had been torn from history so violently that only shadows remained. But shadows speak. In the cracks of ancient texts. In the symbols carved into temples untouched by time. In the forbidden knowledge hoarded by those who still serve in silence. And in the stories of men who claim to have seen them. A military officer in the depths of the Iraqi desert, reporting strange lights that move against the laws of physics. A government scientist disappearing after stumbling onto something buried beneath the sands. A billionaire obsessed with bloodlines, funding expeditions to places no one is meant to go. Coincidence? Or something waking up? The truth has never been lost. It has been buried. Locked away beneath stone and silence, guarded by those who know what happens when we remember. Because to remember the Anunnaki is to remember who we really are. And why they're coming back. The temple stands in ruin, its pillars cracked, its walls worn to whispers. The wind howls through the empty corridors, carrying voices, not of the present, not of the living. Words in a language older than kings, etched into the stone in defiance of time. Not prayers. Not poetry. Commands. Decrees from those who were never meant to be forgotten. A priest once stood here, long before this place was dust. His hands trembled as he laid offerings at the altar, his lips forming names forbidden to be spoken without reverence. Anu. Enlil. Enki. These were not mere gods. They were sovereigns. Engineers of existence. And he was not worshipping. He was obeying. Because these beings did not ask for devotion. They demanded it. Before the first king sat upon a throne, before empires were raised from dust, there was nothing but an ocean of silence. A void without shape, without meaning. Until they arrived. Anu, the silent force of the heavens. The one who watched, who ruled from above, unseen yet absolute. Enlil, the storm-wielding master of the air. The one who decreed fate, who shaped the land with the swing of his will. His breath was the wind, his anger the flood. Enki, the serpent of wisdom, the keeper of forbidden knowledge. He walked among men, whispered to them, defied the order of his own kind. Where others ruled, he created. Where others destroyed, he gave life. Their war did not begin with men. It began with creation itself. The void was split. The waters churned. And from chaos, they forged the first world. Not with hands. Not with tools. But with power, something ancient, something beyond flesh and bone. From the abyss, they raised Ki, the earth, and set the sky above it, a great dome where the gods would reside, always watching. But creation was not peace. It was war. The younger gods, restless, rebellious, refused to labor. They were meant to shape the world, to build it, to maintain the grand design of Anu. Yet they grew weary, resentful. And in the shadows of the heavens, they plotted. Then they rose. The first revolt. A battle unseen by mortals, fought with weapons that shattered mountains and storms that burned the sky. The heavens trembled. The earth cracked. The gods clashed, tearing the world between them. And when the dust settled, a decision was made. The younger gods would not toil. Lesser beings would take their place. The Anunnaki reached into the clay of the earth, and with their own essence, they shaped something new. Something obedient. Something intelligent enough to serve, yet weak enough to be controlled. Humanity. Not born. Engineered. But there was a flaw in the design. A whisper in the darkness. A mind that questioned, hands that built, eyes that remembered. A betrayal loomed. A flood waited. And the gods, they were not finished. Darkness. Not the kind that comes with night, but something else, older, endless, waiting. A silence that hums beneath the skin, a vastness so immense that thought itself crumbles in its presence. Space is not empty. It is not still. It watches. It remembers. And somewhere beyond the reach of human eyes, beyond the mapped constellations, something moves. A planet, if it can even be called that. Nibiru. The wandering world. The missing piece of an equation we were never meant to solve. It drifts along an orbit so vast, so unnatural, that it vanishes from sight for millennia, only to return like a ghost through the void. Ancient tablets speak of its passing. The old priests of Sumer whispered its name with dread. When Nibiru returns, the gods walk once more. But what if they never left? The Anunnaki were never of this earth. Their origins were written in the skies, in the patterns of the stars, in the strange knowledge handed down before the first cities rose from the dust. They were exiles, conquerors, survivors of a world unlike any we have known. A world dying. Nibiru was their cradle, but also their curse. A planet flung too far from its sun, caught in an orbit that stretched across eons. It was not lifeless, it was hungry. Its people were desperate. Their home was fading, its resources depleted, its atmosphere unraveling like threads pulled from an ancient tapestry. They needed more. More gold, more power, more control. They turned their eyes to the stars. And they found us. The arrival was not gentle. The earth trembled. The sky split open with fire and thunder. They came as gods, their ships descending like chariots of flame. Not to bless, not to guide, to claim. They dug into the earth, tore the land apart, stripped it for all it was worth. They mined gold, not for wealth, not for vanity, but for survival. A metal that could save their world, rebuild their sky, preserve the power they had fought so long to keep. But labor was beneath them. So they made us. A crude design at first and obedient, disposable, nothing more than tools. But something went wrong. The clay did not remain still. The blood they mixed with earth carried memories, desires, something they could not control. And then came the war. Between the Anunnaki themselves, between those who saw humanity as nothing but slaves, and those who saw something else. Nibiru still waits in the dark. It still follows its path, unseen, its return inevitable. And when it comes again, what will it bring? The sky tore apart. Not like a storm, not like rain rolling from the heavens, but something violent, unnatural, a wound splitting open in the fabric of existence itself. Fire streaked across the firmament, not falling stars, but something else. Something alive. The ground trembled beneath the weight of an unseen force, a pressure that crushed the air, sent animals into frenzied panic, and made men drop to their knees in terror. Then came the sound. A scream without a throat. A roar without a beast. It came from above, from the very vault of the sky, a deafening blast of power that shattered the silence of the world before time had words for such things. And then they descended. Not as gods of light and mercy. Not as benevolent spirits whispering wisdom through the trees. They arrived like conquerors. Like kings taking what was already theirs. The Sumerians would etch their names into clay, pressing the symbols with careful hands, as if the act itself might summon them once more. Anu, the celestial sovereign, the one who decrees. Enlil, the lord of wind and storm, whose wrath split mountains. Enki, the trickster, the architect of fate, the one who walked where others only watched. But these were not the names spoken when they first came. The first words were cries of fear. Of disbelief. They came in vessels like burning chariots, their forms draped in shadows cast by the fire of their descent. Their shapes, tall, commanding, terrible, loomed over those who had never seen anything beyond the forests, the rivers, the land they called home. Some ran. Some fell to the earth, faces pressed into the dust, arms outstretched as if submission might save them. None were prepared. The air itself grew heavy, thick with something unseen. Not smoke. Not dust. Something else. Something electric. The sensation of being watched, of being studied, of minds far beyond human comprehension peeling back the layers of flesh and bone to see the essence within. They did not speak at first. They only stood, staring. And then came the first command. A sound, not of this world, not shaped by human tongues, but all who heard it understood. Kneel. The men obeyed. The women wept. The children clung to their mothers, their small hearts pounding against fragile ribs. This was the moment that split time in two. Before the gods. After the gods. The Anunnaki had come. And they were not leaving. The air was thick with silence. A silence that was not empty, but waiting. Watching. A silence that crushed the lungs, pressed into the skin, filled the mind with the weight of something immeasurable. At the heart of the great chamber, a throne stood empty. Not because there was no ruler, but because his presence was something that did not require flesh, did not need to be seen to be felt. Anu. The unseen force. The sky-made will. The one who decrees. Below him, in the hierarchy of the divine, stood two. Brothers, but never equals. Enlil. The storm, the warlord, the wielder of the tablet of destinies. His voice was thunder, his wrath the flood, his dominion absolute over the land below. A god who did not ask, he commanded. Where he walked, kings trembled. Where he ruled, obedience was not a choice. Enki. The architect, the whisperer, the one whose hand shaped the fate of the world in ways unseen. He was water, flowing through the cracks of destiny, reshaping, bending, creating. Where Enlil destroyed, Enki built. Where Enlil ruled through fear, Enki ruled through knowledge. And knowledge was a weapon more dangerous than any blade. Between them, the tension was a wound that never closed. One saw humans as tools. The other, as something more. One sought order through control. The other sought power through creation. One would see Earth as a dominion. The other, as a laboratory. Their war did not begin with swords. It began with silence. With looks held too long. With words left unsaid. The others took their places beneath them. Ninhursag, the mother, the life-giver, the one who could shape flesh from dust. Her hands had molded the first humans, her breath had given them life, but even she could not stop what was coming. Inanna, the untamed. Love and war, seduction and death, beauty and chaos. She did not take sides. She took thrones. She wove destruction into passion, turned empires into dust with a smile. Nergal, Lord of the Dead. He did not rule through fear. He ruled through certainty. All things would come to him, in time. He waited, and in his waiting, he knew victory was inevitable. And so the structure was set. Power above power, secrets within secrets. A system as immovable as the heavens, a balance held together by tension so tight, so fragile, that one act of defiance could shatter it forever. One act did. A brother's betrayal. A forbidden creation. A war not just between gods, but within them. The silence in the great chamber did not last. It never could. Not when the throne remained empty, and the gods still fought to claim it. The chamber pulsed with an unnatural hum, a sound that wasn't heard, but felt, vibrating in the marrow, whispering secrets into the skin. The air was thick with the scent of something metallic, something ancient. It clung to the walls, the stone, the very breath of the one standing at the threshold of creation. A figure loomed over the slab, hand steady, gaze sharp as obsidian. Enki. The master of life, the architect of flesh. He was not a god who prayed, he was a god who built. And tonight, the silence of the universe was about to be shattered. Before him lay the raw material of something forbidden. Something that had never existed before. Something that should not exist. The essence of an ancient being, one of their own, mixed with the clay of the earth, fused with a force that no mortal tongue could name. The others stood in the shadows, watching. Waiting. They did not speak, but the weight of their judgment was suffocating. Will it survive? One of them finally asked. Enki did not answer. He lifted his hands, slick with creation, and pressed them into the flesh before him. There was no hesitation. No doubt. He knew what he was doing. He knew the consequences. A heartbeat. Then another. The thing on the slab convulsed. Not violently, just enough to send a ripple of something terrifyingly real through the chamber. It was working. A murmur, low and uncertain, spread among the gods. Even Enlil, the warlord, the master of command, took a step forward. His eyes were narrowed, unreadable. This is a mistake. Enki's jaw tightened, but he did not look up. His hands moved with precision, adjusting, molding, correcting. This was not a mistake. This was evolution. The thing on the slab coughed. It had lungs. It had breath. It had life. And then, it opened its eyes. The chamber froze. It was not supposed to happen this fast. No one spoke. No one breathed. The weight of creation itself pressed into the room. The being's gaze darted around, filled with something that no one had accounted for. Fear. It did not understand what it was. It did not know what it had been made for. Enki stepped closer, but Enlil's voice cracked through the air like a blade. Enough. But it was too late. The thing on the slab, the thing that should not have existed, moved. And in that moment, the gods knew. They had created something that would never obey. The ground trembled beneath them, not with the force of an earthquake, but with the weight of something far more profound. The first of them, Adamu, stood in the dust, breath shuddering in the cold air, eyes wide and unblinking. His skin, still slick from the hands that shaped him, shivered under the weight of unseen eyes. They were watching. The gods. The architects of his flesh. The silence was unbearable. He was not alone. Others stirred beside him, their bodies bearing the same marks, the same breath of new life. They did not understand what they were. Not yet. But they knew they were not free. The sky above stretched in endless blackness, punctured by stars that seemed far too distant to care. Fires burned in the distance, their smoke curling into the heavens like whispered prayers that would never be answered. The gods did not pray. The gods commanded. And Adamu? He obeyed. A voice, sharp as flint, heavy as thunder, cut through the stillness. Work. The word meant nothing to him. But the hands that pushed him forward, the weight of expectation that crushed his spine, made it clear. He was no divine being. No child of the heavens. He was a tool. The gods had spoken, and the first humans had no choice but to listen. The fruit was warm in her hands. Not hot. Not cold. Just warm enough to feel alive. A pulse. A whisper. A thing that should have been silent, yet spoke in ways that had no words. Eve, though that was not the name she had been given, held it between her fingers, the skin so perfect it seemed unreal. A forbidden thing. An untouchable thing. Yet here it was, caught between her hands like a dying star, its weight heavier than the world itself. The air did not move. The leaves above held their breath, frozen mid-sway, as if the entire garden knew what was about to happen. Knew that this moment was not just a moment, but a fracture in time. A cut so deep it would never heal. A sound, soft as the wind, sharp as a blade. You are afraid. It was not a question. Eve's fingers tightened around the fruit. She was afraid. Not of the gods who walked in the garden, not of the rules whispered in the golden air. She was afraid of what she already knew. That she was blind. That something was missing. That the world they had been given, perfect as it was a lie. The voice slithered through her mind, ancient and knowing. A voice older than the garden itself. They made you to serve. Her breath caught. They keep you blind, so you never ask why. A single thought cracked through her like lightning. What if they lied? Her grip tightened. Her pulse quickened. She raised the fruit to her lips. And the garden shuddered. The air was thick with the stench of sweat and fire. Hands, calloused, raw, bleeding, gripped the tools of their endless labor. Their backs, once straight, had long since bent under the weight of their duty. The ground beneath them was not earth but punishment, a pitiless wasteland where the sky never softened, where the stars above mocked their suffering. The Igigi were not born to serve. They were gods. Lesser, perhaps, than the ones who sat upon thrones of light, but gods all the same. Yet here they stood, buried in toil, shaping the land, carving its bones, pulling gold from the dirt, lifting stone upon stone for an eternity that was not theirs. And the heavens did not weep for them. Each sunrise was a curse, dragging them from restless sleep. Each sunset was a taunt, another day stolen, another promise of suffering renewed. They had cried out to Anu, the great father, their voices a chorus of desperation that rattled the very edges of creation. But the sky did not answer. The heavens did not listen. The decree of the elder gods had been absolute. The Igigi would labor. The Igigi would break. The Igigi would bleed. Until they did not. It began in whispers. Soft, secret things that slither between the hammering of stone and the burning of flesh. Words spoken in shadows, in the breathless spaces where agony met rage. Enough. One voice. Then another. And another. Until the silence between them was filled with fire. They rose from the pits with fists hardened by suffering, with eyes blackened by betrayal. The masters of the heavens had turned their backs for too long. The Igigi would burn their own names into the sky. They stormed the great city of the gods with vengeance written upon their skin. The child was born beneath an eclipse. The air was still, as if the very world held its breath. In the temple's heart, cloaked figures gathered, their eyes wide, their lips moving in hushed prayers. Outside, the city swelled with restless bodies, pressed together in uneasy silence. None of them spoke of what they feared, but it curled in their chests like a tightening noose. A birth such as this was no ordinary thing. It was an omen. A declaration. Blood thicker than water. Blood older than stone. The high priest's trembling hands lifted the newborn, his gaze searching, desperate, as if he expected the heavens themselves to intervene. They did not. But the child's eyes, impossibly black, endless as the void, spoke of something far greater than human flesh. The whispers began before the afterbirth had cooled. Anunnaki! No crown had been placed upon the infant's head, yet the people knelt. No decree had been issued, yet they obeyed. The blood was all that mattered. The blood commanded. It always had. Before kings, before empires, before the first kingdom was carved from dust and war, the gods had ruled. And when they receded into the shadows, when they abandoned the thrones of their making, they left something behind. A lineage. A mark carved into flesh, into bone, into the very fabric of those who would rule the world in their absence. The rulers were not chosen by men. They were born of something far older, far more terrible. And the blood remembers. 1,000 years passed. 10,000. Civilizations rose and crumbled, yet the blood never faded. It carried itself through the veins of conquerors, emperors, and kings. It burned beneath the skin of those who shaped history with their hands, who held nations in their grasp and whispered commands that shattered entire peoples. They were never ordinary. They were never like the rest. The old text spoke of them in half-truths and riddles, smothered beneath centuries of deception. The stories twisted, blurred, transformed into myths meant to lull the mind, to keep the truth buried beneath the weight of disbelief. But there were those who never forgot. Those who watched the rulers and saw the glint of something inhuman lurking behind their eyes. Those who felt the pulse of something ancient, something unnatural, when they stood in their presence. The blood was still strong. It did not thin with time. It did not fade with distance. It was waiting. It was always waiting. The first crack of thunder split the sky like a wound torn open by unseen hands. The air was thick with something unspoken, something ancient, something waiting. The clouds swirled above the scorched earth, black as the abyss between stars. Beneath them, two figures stood motionless, their gazes locked, their very breath a challenge. Brothers. But not in spirit. Not in purpose. Not anymore. Enlil's stance was rigid, his jaw clenched, his fingers twitching at his side as if itching to command the winds to rise, to tear the heavens apart, to bring forth destruction as proof of his dominion. His word had been law. his decree had shaped empires. Yet now, before him, stood the one being who defied him without fear. Enki. The trickster. The creator. The one who whispered to the earth instead of crushing it beneath his heel. The one who saw possibility where Enlil saw only order to be upheld. Enki did not kneel. He did not waver beneath the weight of his brother's wrath. His lips curled slightly, the faintest hint of a smile, mocking, daring, unafraid. The silence stretched, a blade against the throat of the universe. And then, Enlil struck. The force of his will ripped through the sky, lightning crashing down with a vengeance, the ground splitting apart as the storm was born. The very air trembled as the fury of a god unfurled in an unstoppable wave, roaring, howling, demanding submission. But Enki did not flinch. He lifted his hand, and the waters obeyed. From the depths of the earth, from the endless black beneath the soil, the rivers rebelled against their banks, rising in defiance. The storm met the flood, and in that collision of gods, the world itself trembled. This was not their first battle. And it would not be their last. They had been at war since the moment the first stone was set in place, since the first name was carved into existence. They had fought not with swords, but with the fates of entire civilizations, with the bending of destiny itself. Enlil, who sought control. Enki, who sought creation. One demanded obedience. The other offered knowledge. The people feared Enlil's wrath, yet they prayed in secret to Enki. In the dead of night, they whispered his name, begging for wisdom, for mercy, for a power that did not crush, but guided. And Enlil knew. He saw the way Enki had woven himself into the very fabric of mankind. The way his influence spread like roots beneath the soil, unseen but unshakable. This was treason. This was war. And neither would yield. The wind had stopped. Not a whisper. Not a breath. The world was holding itself still, as if it knew, as if it feared what was coming. The sky was wrong. Not just dark, not just heavy with storm clouds, but unnatural. A blackness deeper than night, thick and suffocating, curling over the heavens like something alive, something waiting. The people below watched in silence, their faces pale, their bodies rigid, their souls screaming for answers that would not come. Then, the first drop fell. Small. Harmless. A bead of water rolling down a child's cheek. But it was not alone. Another. Then another. And then, the sky split open. Rain came down in a fury, a vengeance long withheld, a rage finally unleashed. It did not fall, it attacked. Sheets of water slammed into the earth, filling the streets in seconds, rushing through homes, swallowing voices before they could scream. A woman ran, clutching her child to her chest, her breath ragged, her feet slipping on the drowning ground. Her cries were lost in the roar. The riverbanks shattered. The earth broke apart. Walls of water, higher than temples, higher than mountains, rushed forward with a force that defied the gods themselves. There was no escape. The ocean had left its prison, and it was taking everything with it. In the highest temple, torches flickered in defiance against the storm. The priests stood frozen before the altar, their hands shaking as they called out names that would not answer. The gods had spoken. This was their decree. The world was being erased. A man clung to a crumbling pillar, his fingers bleeding against the stone. He looked up at the sky, his lips forming a prayer that would never be finished. The water reached him before the words did. The screams did not last. Towers fell, swallowed whole. Cities vanished in a heartbeat, their histories torn from time, their legacies reduced to nothing but sediment beneath the waves. It was not a storm. It was judgment. The gods had pressed their hands upon the world and wiped it clean. The sky burned. Not with fire, not with smoke, but with something unseen, a presence, a fury, a silent command from above. The tower loomed, its shadow stretching across the earth, its stones stacked higher than any structure before it. A monument to defiance. A rebellion forged in dust and sweat and whispered prayers. A stairway to the gods. Hands bled as they lifted bricks, muscles trembled under the weight, but still, they climbed. Higher. Closer. The air thinned as they ascended, but they did not stop. They could not. The whispers had turned into voices, voices into chants, and now the chants thundered through the streets below. We will reach them. We will not be caged. The gods watched. Silent. Still. Seething. A boy, no older than 10, stood on the highest level, staring upward. His heart pounded against his ribs. His father's voice had filled his ears since birth, stories of a time when gods and men were one, when the heavens were not forbidden, when knowledge was not chained. But now, the chains were breaking. He reached up, fingers trembling, as if he could already feel the air of another world pressing against his skin. The gods had kept them low, but they were climbing. And the gods were afraid. The first crack came with the wind. A shudder through the stones. A whisper of dust trickling down the side. The boy froze. The world around him seemed to hold its breath. Then, the sky screamed. A soundless force ripped through the tower, through their minds, through their very existence. It was not fire. It was not wind. It was something older, something crueler. The boy staggered, his father's voice drowned in the roar. The workers cried out, some gripping the stones, others covering their ears as if they could shut out the sound of a god's wrath. A woman collapsed, hands clutching her head, her lips moving in terror. Words she did not know. A language she had never spoken. And then another. And another. Voices rose, screaming, begging, calling out, but they could not understand each other. Their words, once unified, had been shattered like glass. The chants that had carried them higher than ever before now meant nothing. They had been broken. The tower swayed. The gods had spoken. And what they spoke was ruin. The first stone gave way, plummeting into the depths below. Then another. Then 100. The boy reached for his father, but his father did not understand his cries. The voices around him had turned to chaos, shouting, sobbing, roaring in languages that no longer fit in their throats. The tower fell. The sky watched. And the gods did not let them rise again. The sky was not silent. It raged. It burned. It split apart as if the heavens themselves were at war. Lightning cracked in jagged veins across the blackness, illuminating the battlefield below, a wasteland of shattered cities, broken obelisks, and the corpses of those who dared to stand between the gods. The ground trembled, not from the weight of marching armies, but from something far older. Something buried. Something waiting. A figure stood at the center of it all, his golden eyes fixed on the horizon where the enemy gathered. He had once called them brothers. Now, they were nothing but ghosts of a fractured pantheon, wielding weapons forged in the stars, carrying the wrath of those who would never bow. The wind carried the scent of fire and blood. The war had begun long ago, but tonight, it would end. A voice, sharp as obsidian, sliced through the storm. You were never meant to rule. Enlil's word struck harder than any blade. Across the field, Enki stood tall, his armor slick with the rain, his face unreadable. His was the wisdom of creation, but Enlil was the storm, the law, the hammer of divine will. They had warred before, but never like this. Never with everything on the line. A tremor rippled through the earth, and the ground beneath them split open, a wound in the flesh of the world, pulsing with an ancient energy that even the gods feared. The very foundation of their rule, their power, was unraveling beneath them. And still, neither moved. The armies behind them shifted, restless, uncertain. The Anunnaki who had chosen Enlil stood in rigid formation, their weapons humming with a power stolen from the depths of the universe. The ones who had sworn themselves to Enki waited, their eyes reflecting the flames that still burned from the ruins behind them. The first scream came from the sky. A shape descended, a blinding, terrible force, a god that had been exiled long before this war began. The ground shuddered as he landed, his wings unfurling like the banners of a forgotten age. Ninurta. Enlil's executioner. Enki exhaled slowly. There was no turning back now. The first blow struck like the fall of a dying star. Ninurta's blade carved through the air, a weapon of pure light, and the battlefield exploded in chaos. The war of the gods was not fought with mere steel and flesh. It tore through existence itself. Mountains crumbled under their fury. Rivers boiled and turned to steam. The sky bled fire. Time itself trembled as the very essence of creation was wielded as a weapon. A god fell, his body shattering into dust before it ever touched the ground. Another screamed as a spear of pure energy pierced through his chest, his divine form flickering, breaking, collapsing into nothingness. Enki moved through the carnage, his eyes locked on Enlil. Every step was a challenge, every breath a warning. Then, the earth convulsed. A new presence rose. Not a warrior. Not a god. Something worse. It had been buried before the first kingdom was ever built, before the first man ever drew breath. Something older than them all. The war had woken it. And now, it was hungry. The battle stilled for a fraction of a second, long enough for Enki to meet Enlil's gaze across the wreckage. Neither spoke. There was nothing left to say. The gods had fought for dominion over Earth. But now, they would fight for survival. The sky was silent, too silent. Not the silence of peace, but the silence of something unfinished, something severed before its time. The air carried the weight of things unspoken, of ancient voices that once shook the heavens now swallowed by an absence too vast to comprehend. Beneath that empty sky, the great cities stood abandoned. Once, their ziggurats touched the clouds, their streets roared with the footsteps of mortals and gods alike. Now, the wind slithered through crumbling archways, whispering the names of those who would never return. The fires that once burned in the sacred temples had long since turned to cold ash. But the echoes remained. The Anunnaki were gone. Not dead. Not defeated. But gone. It had not been a single moment, a single night when the gods turned their backs on Earth. It had been a slow unraveling, a war without a battlefield, a war of will, of power, of consequence. It had started with whispers in the halls of the divine, questions that had no answers, doubts that had no refuge. The gods had made the world in their image. And then, the world had betrayed them. They had gifted fire, knowledge, dominion. And what had mankind done with it? Built towers that reached into the sky, as if to stand among their creators. Waged wars not in the name of the gods, but in the name of kings who fancied themselves divine. They had slaughtered, enslaved, defied. The gods had watched. At first with amusement. Then with anger. Then with something worse. Doubt. Enlil had been the first to speak the unthinkable. They are not ours anymore. His voice had carried across the golden halls of Nibiru, the home they had forsaken for a world they thought they could control. Enki had refused to hear it. They are still of us, he had said. They only need time. But time was a cruel master. And mankind was no longer kneeling. The final betrayal had come not from war, not from rebellion, but from a question spoken in the shadow of a dying temple. Why do we still serve them? A mortal had asked it, his voice trembling, but his eyes had been steady. And the gods had no answer. The decision had not been made in the way mortals decide things, with councils and votes and arguments that stretched through the night. It had been something deeper, something instinctive, like a great tide shifting beneath the surface of the world. The Anunnaki had simply known. It was over. One by one, they left. Some in anger, some in sorrow. Some without a word. The skies that had once been torn open by their arrival were silent as they departed. There were no grand proclamations, no parting gifts of wisdom or wrath. They simply faded. The last to go stood upon the highest peak, the place where the old gods had first set foot on this world. He looked upon what remained, the ruins, the fires, the mortals who no longer raised their eyes to the heavens in prayer. For the first time in 1,000 ages, the gods were afraid. Not of war. Not of death. But of being forgotten. And then, he too was gone. The stones hum. Even in silence, they hum. A vibration too low for the human ear, but not for the bones. It presses against the skin, settles in the chest like something ancient, something alive. The pyramids do not crumble. They do not wither, do not break beneath the weight of time the way all things should. Because they were never meant to. They were not built for kings. Not for tombs. They were anchors, conduits, weapons, maps. The first ones who stood beneath those colossal forms did not look up in wonder. They looked up in remembrance. Because they had seen them before. Not built, but placed. The sun rises over Giza, a dull, indifferent eye casting gold over the sands, the same sands that have swallowed civilizations whole. And yet, the pyramids remain. Unafraid of time, of sand, of ruin. Who moves stones that weigh more than an army? Who carves precision into granite harder than steel? Who aligns monuments to stars that will shift only after thousands of lifetimes? The answer is written in the stones themselves, but the stones do not speak in ways men understand. And so they lie. They speak of slaves, of wooden ramps, of human hands shaping what no human hand could shape again. They speak of primitive tools in the face of impossible engineering. They speak so they do not have to listen. But the stones remember. Beneath the pyramids, beneath the monoliths, beneath every towering mystery of the ancient world, the bones of something else wait. Something older than kings, older than priests, older than the gods men fashioned in their own image. There are those who still listen. Those who feel the pull of the impossible, the quiet command hidden in perfect angles, in magnetic fields that should not exist, in tunnels that stretch where no tunnel should go. They step inside and feel the air shift around them. The weight of something unseen, pressing down, watching. Because the pyramids do not simply stand. They wait. The crown was never meant for men. It was carved from fire, forged in the stars, passed from hands that were not human, hands that shaped the first cities, the first thrones, the first empires. The one who wears it does not own it. They are owned by it. The weight of the kingship is more than gold. It is a contract. A tether. A curse. The first to kneel before it did not question. They did not hesitate. The voice that spoke from the heavens was not to be defied. Kings were chosen, not by men, not by blood, but by those who ruled from above. The gods did not whisper. They commanded. And the kings obeyed. It was not governance. It was servitude. Bloodlines were shaped, manipulated, controlled. Those who carried the mark, the unspoken inheritance, the invisible seal of divinity, were placed on the thrones of earth. Their power was never their own. It was borrowed, granted like a blade pressed against the throat. They were the link between the gods and the nameless masses, standing on pedestals built from fear and reverence. They spoke with voices that were not their own. In the dead of night, in the shadows of their palaces, they heard it. The hum. The pull of something vast and ancient, something far beyond the mortal world. A force that whispered in dreams, that coiled around their thoughts, that demanded loyalty. To defy it was to be unmade. So they played their part. They walked among men as gods themselves, wielding power that did not belong to them. Every war, every decree, every sacrifice, done in the name of the unseen. And yet, in their final moments, when the crown slipped from their heads and the breath left their bodies, they all saw the same thing. The truth. They were never kings. They were pawns. The gods did not leave without a trace. They burned their mark into the stone, etched their names into the bones of the earth, shaped civilizations with hands that did not tremble, with minds that did not forget. They walked among men, and men knelt before them. In the deserts of Egypt, under the weight of time and sand, their symbols remain: serpents with knowing eyes, beings with inhuman proportions, hands reaching toward the stars as if remembering where they came from. Temples, pyramids, obelisks, all aligned, all precise, all humming with an energy that should not exist. As if the ground itself still remembers the footsteps of the ones who ruled before kings. In Mesopotamia, where the first words were carved into clay, their names are written like a warning, like a whisper that refuses to die. Enlil, Enki, Inanna, Ninhursag. The ones who shaped the first cities, who gave fire and law, who demanded blood and loyalty. The ziggurats rise like broken spines from the dust, their stairways reaching into silence, waiting for the return of something long gone. Across the oceans, in the jungles where stone is swallowed by roots, where the air is thick with secrets, their presence lingers. Mesoamerican kings wear their faces, carve their stories, build their altars. The gods who came from the sky, who brought knowledge, who left, promising to return. But the gods do not return. And yet, their influence remains, woven into the myths, the architecture, the bloodlines. A memory too vast to fade, a shadow that stretches across centuries. The priests still chant their names. The stones still hold their whispers. And the world still waits. The ground trembled beneath their feet. Not like the quiver of wind through trees. Not like the distant murmur of thunder. This was something else. A weight upon the world, pressing down, suffocating, splitting stone beneath bare heels the size of shields. They moved through the land like forgotten gods, remnants of a past that should not have been. The Nephilim. The fallen ones. Born of divine corruption, the offspring of angels who gazed upon mortal flesh with hunger, they were neither men nor gods, but something caught in between. Too strong for humanity, too flawed for the heavens. They walked, and men fell to their knees. They spoke, and mountains swallowed their echoes. Their eyes held storms. Their hands shattered armies. Legends whispered of their hunger, a hunger that could not be sated, a thirst that drank rivers dry, a wrath that turned cities to graves. They ruled with an arrogance carved into their bones, a knowing that they were more, that they were made for dominion, that the world belonged to them. But the heavens disagreed. Lightning ripped open the sky. A fury descended, not of man, not of beast, but of something far worse, something ancient, something holy, something that would not tolerate the abomination any longer. The flood came, and the giants drowned screaming. But echoes of their existence refused to die. Their bones turned to stone, their names etched into forgotten tongues, their bloodlines seeping through the cracks of history. And sometimes, when the earth trembles for no reason at all, when shadows stretch too long, when a voice too deep to be human whispers through the wind, it is said that they are not truly gone. The cup trembled in his hands. Not from weakness. Not from cold. But from something deeper, something that clawed at the edges of sanity, whispering of things men were never meant to hold. The liquid inside was thick, dark, heavier than water, heavier than blood. It clung to the rim, slow and patient, as if it knew its own power. His breath hitched. This was it. The thing kings had slaughtered for, the secret buried beneath temples and sealed away in the tongues of the dead. Eternal life. A single drop touched his lips. The world shifted. Every heartbeat stretched, echoing through the marrow of his bones. The walls around him aged, crumbling into dust, reforming, shifting, falling apart again. Time unraveled, bending to him, twisting around his existence. He could hear the screams of those who had come before, voices of the desperate, the cursed, the ones who had sipped too much, who had begged for it to end. And he understood. This was never a gift. This was a weight. A chain. A thing that did not let go. The cup fell, shattering against the stone. But it was too late. The air was electric. Not with sound, not with movement, but with something unseen, something humming just beneath the surface of existence. The chamber was vast, its walls shifting in the torchlight, but the flames were not the source of illumination. Strange symbols flickered across the stone, glowing softly, pulsing like a living thing. The priests stood motionless, their breaths shallow, their hands trembling at their sides. They had memorized the rituals, the chants, the sacred words passed down from a time before men built cities, before kings ruled, before gods walked among them. But this was different. The glyphs moved. Not a trick of the eyes, not the play of light, no, the stone itself breathed. One of the elders took a step forward, his hesitation hanging thick in the air. His fingertips grazed the markings, and the temple roared to life. Walls shook, the earth rumbled beneath their feet, and from the center of the chamber, something rose. Not a statue. Not a relic. A machine. Metal, yet not metal. Smoother than anything forged by human hands, its surface rippled like liquid mercury, reflecting not just the world around it, but something else, something far away, something that should not have been seen. The priests fell to their knees, whispering prayers in languages long forgotten, their minds screaming against what they could not comprehend. The Anunnaki had left something behind. Not myths. Not legends. Technology. The ground swallowed him whole. One step, solid earth beneath his boots. The next, nothing but air, then the sickening pull of gravity as the world vanished above him. He did not scream. There was no time. Only the rush of darkness, thick and absolute, wrapping around him like a burial shroud. The fall should have killed him. Should have shattered bones, ripped flesh, stolen breath. But it didn't. Because there was no impact. He landed softly, unnaturally so, as if unseen hands had caught him, lowered him into the abyss with care. Silence pressed against his ears, heavier than the weight of stone. Not silence. Something worse. A stillness that did not belong, a pause in existence itself. The kind of quiet that comes when something ancient is listening. He was not alone. His hands trembled as he reached for the torch strapped to his side. The strike of flint, the bloom of fire, a weak, flickering glow against the vast unknown. The light pushed back the shadows, but only just. The walls were smooth, impossibly smooth, curving in ways his mind rejected. This was not rock carved by human hands, nor tunnels forged by time. It was something else. Something deliberate. Footsteps. Not his own. Far ahead, but moving closer. Slow. Measured. He lifted the torch higher, breath trapped in his chest. The passage stretched forward, widening into a space too vast to comprehend. Structures loomed in the darkness, pillars taller than any known to man, staircases that spiraled into nothing, doorways leading nowhere. The city was dead, but not abandoned. The footsteps stopped. No, not footsteps. Breathing. Low. Hollow. Ancient. His heartbeat slammed against his ribs as he stepped forward. The air thickened, pressing into his lungs like water. The torch sputtered, a whisper of heat in the cold. Then, something moved. Not ahead. Above. His pulse turned to ice. He did not want to look. But the shadows shifted, peeling away from the ceiling in slow, deliberate motion. Something had been waiting. The stone should not have moved. It was solid, unmoving, dead. It had been there for centuries, perhaps longer, weathered by time, untouched by man. And yet, as the final rays of the dying sun stretched across the barren land, it shifted. A low, grinding hum pulsed through the air, felt not through the ears, but through the bones. The weight of the world itself seemed to tremble, as if something unseen was awakening beneath the surface. He stepped back, his breath turning shallow. The symbols carved into the monolith burned with a dull, otherworldly glow, pulsing in rhythm with the unseen force vibrating through the air. They were not human markings. Not words. Not warnings. They were instructions. A gust of wind howled through the canyon, but it carried no dust, no scent of the desert. It was wrong. This wind did not belong here. It was something else. A whisper of something vast, something from the beyond. The ground beneath his feet was no longer solid. It wavered, like heat on the horizon, but colder, an absence of warmth, of life, of certainty. The monolith pulsed again, and the world around him thinned. Not opened. Not cracked. Thinned. He could still see the desert, the scattered stones, the sky bleeding into night. But beyond them, just past the veil of what his mind insisted was reality, there was something more. A city, perhaps. or something far greater. It shimmered, impossible, flickering like a mirage yet more real than the world he knew. Towers rose beyond sight, formed from no stone, no metal, no material bound to this earth. Light spiraled through the sky, bending and twisting, neither flame nor electricity, but something that pulsed with a living force. And in the center, waiting, was the gateway. It was not a door. It was not a tunnel. It was absence itself. A hole in existence, rimmed with shifting symbols that moved like living things, whispering in tongues older than time. The monolith pulsed again. This time, the air split. Not with sound. Not with force. With absence. And something stepped through. The stones were wrong. They stood where no stones should stand, where no human hand should have been able to place them. The wind curled through the gaps, whispering in tongues long dead, carrying the weight of something far older than memory. They loomed against the sky, monolithic and unmoving, yet something in their stillness felt alive. Watching. He reached out. His fingers barely brushed the cold surface, and a shock of something, not electricity, not warmth, not cold, rippled through his bones. His breath caught. The stone was not lifeless. It was something more. Something waiting. The air thickened. The clouds above twisted in slow, unnatural spirals, as if time itself was bending to the presence of these impossible structures. Who built them? How? The question clung to his mind like a parasite. The weight of the stones, the impossible balance, the sheer arrogance of their existence, nothing made sense. Not even today, with all the technology, all the knowledge of modern man. And yet, the stones stood. Some said they were tombs. Others claimed they were temples, celestial calendars, echoes of forgotten gods. But there was something else, something no theory could explain. Why did they feel like they had never been abandoned? The monoliths were silent. But it was not an empty silence. It was the silence of something waiting to be heard. The numbers kept repeating. She hadn't noticed at first. They were buried in the cracks of ancient walls, in the spirals of seashells, in the perfect angles of pyramids that should have crumbled long ago. But once she saw them, once she felt them, she couldn't look away. Something was speaking. Not in words. Not in voices. But in ratios, in patterns, in the silent hum of the universe. A code. A whisper older than time itself, etched into the very bones of existence. A shiver crawled down her spine as she traced her fingers over the golden spiral, carved with impossible precision into stone that predated recorded history. How did they know? How did they map the language of the gods before telescopes, before satellites, before the endless hunger of modern science? The same numbers appeared again. The same geometry, mirroring itself across civilizations separated by oceans, by centuries, by stories that had long since turned to dust. The flower of life. The Fibonacci sequence. The alignment of megaliths that bled across the earth like veins in a celestial body. She exhaled, but the air felt heavy, charged with something unseen. This wasn't coincidence. It couldn't be. Someone, something, he had left a message. And it was waiting to be heard. The sky was wrong. Not in the way a storm bends the horizon, nor in the way the sun bleeds red before vanishing into the abyss of night. This was something else. A silence too vast, too unnatural, as if the stars themselves had paused, watching. Waiting. He felt it first. A tremor, subtle as a breath, shivering beneath his feet. Then another. A pulse, too precise, too deliberate to be mistaken for anything but intent. The old texts had spoken of this. The myths, the warnings. They had been reduced to stories, diluted into allegories for lesser minds. But those who had truly listened, those who had traced the ancient words with trembling fingers, they knew. The gods were never gone. They had only stepped away, their absence a test, a wound left to fester in the illusion of time. But time was bending now, cracking at the edges, pulling them back through the seams of forgotten prophecy. The sky burned. The ground groaned beneath the weight of something unseen. They were coming. The old man's eyes were too sharp. Too knowing. They didn't belong in a face carved by centuries, a face that had seen too much, remembered too much. His hands, though trembling with the weight of age, carried something unnatural, something ancient. The way he moved, slow yet deliberate, betrayed a truth no one dared to say aloud. Blood never forgets. He stood at the edge of the gathering, unseen by those who believed themselves untouchable. The world had crowned them kings, yet they bowed to a power older than crowns, older than thrones, older than history itself. He watched them raise their glasses, watched the way their lips curled around words spoken in whispers, a language that did not belong to men. They thought they were alone. A woman stepped forward, her presence sharper than a blade, her silence heavier than the air before a storm. Her eyes, dark as the void between stars, locked onto his. A flicker of recognition. Not fear. Not surprise. Something else. A warning. He did not blink. He had come too far, traced too many bloodlines, followed the trail of forgotten names etched in stone and scripture. He had unearthed something they had spent centuries burying beneath gold, beneath power, beneath lies. The glass in her hand stilled. The others continued, their laughter smooth, their movements rehearsed. But she knew. And now, so did he. There was no need for words. The bloodline had never been broken. It had only learned to hide. The sky should have been empty. A vast stretch of ink-black nothingness, speckled with distant fire. It had always been that way. A truth so old, so absolute, that no one thought to question it. Until it moved. Not a falling star. Not a meteor slicing through the heavens. This was different. Silent. Unnatural. A wound in the sky itself. The man stood frozen, breath caught somewhere between awe and terror. His hands, steady in war, now trembled at the sight of something that should not be. His ancestors had spoken of gods who descended on wings of fire, of celestial beings whose voices shook mountains and carved rivers into stone. He had dismissed them as myths, stories meant to keep the weak obedient, the fearful in line. But now, as the impossible hovered above him, he understood. They had never been myths. A sudden shift. A flicker of motion too fast for the eye to follow. The air thickened, charged with something unseen but undeniable, pressing against his chest, his skull, his very bones. And then, the light. It did not glow. It did not shine. It bled, a silver-white brilliance that swallowed the stars, seared itself into his mind, burned behind his eyelids. And then, as quickly as it had come, it was gone. The night returned, indifferent, untouched. But something had changed. Something had seen him. The file was never supposed to exist. Its pages, brittle with age, carried a silence far heavier than any ink or paper should. The man's hands, steady through years of war, trembled as he turned them. Words blacked out, entire paragraphs swallowed by thick, merciless strokes. The weight of it pressed into his skull, a slow, suffocating squeeze. What was so dangerous that even words had to be buried? A single, unredacted sentence sent ice through his veins. The retrieval was successful. The entity has been secured. Casualties, 26. Witnesses, 4, status of witnesses, eliminated. His stomach twisted. His pulse pounded against his ribs, his throat. The word lingered, eliminated. He looked around, the shadows of the archive stretching longer than they should. The buzzing overhead light flickered, once, twice. The building was silent. Too silent. As if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Was someone watching? He pressed on, flipping pages, eyes darting between fragmented reports. A photograph slid free from the stack and landed at his feet. His breath caught. It showed a hand. Or what used to be one. Charred, elongated, the skin stretched unnaturally over bones that did not belong to anything human. The fingers were wrong, too many joints, too many bends, curling inward as if trying to claw their way out of the frame. No date. No location. No explanation. He swallowed hard, throat dry as dust. He had spent years hearing whispers, fragments of conversations cut short when he walked into a room, rumors that vanished like smoke. But this was different. This was proof. His pulse quickened. Footsteps. Distant, slow, deliberate. He shoved the files back into their worn folder, his mind racing. He was never supposed to see this. And now, someone knew that he had. The boy was screaming. Not in pain. Not in terror. Something else. Something worse. His mother clutched him, arms wrapped so tightly around his small frame that her nails dug into his skin. But she could not stop it. None of them could. His spine arched, muscles seizing as if something unseen was reaching into him, twisting him apart from the inside. His veins, dark as ink, pulsed under his skin like living things. His eyes, God, his eyes, were wide, too wide, the pupils expanding until the color was gone. His breath came in short, jagged gasps, then a silence so complete it felt like the world had stopped breathing with him. Then, the sound. A low, vibrating hum that rattled the glass in the windows, that made every bone in the body tremble. The air itself seemed to shift, heavy with an energy no one could name. And then, the voice. Not his own. Not human. It has begun. The mother fell back, her shaking hands covering her mouth. Tears streaked her face, but she did not dare move. She did not dare breathe. The boy's body went slack, collapsing into the cold wooden floor like a marionette with its strings cut. The humming stopped. The world exhaled. Outside, the sky churned, an unnatural flickering of color that did not belong. A ripple in the air, barely visible, but there, stretching across the horizon like a wound in reality itself. Something was changing. And it was too late to stop it. The stars were wrong. They flickered like dying embers, pulsing with an unnatural rhythm, as if something vast and unseen had laid its hand upon them, distorting their ancient paths. The sky, usually a quiet witness to eternity, seemed alive, breathing, shifting, watching. In the silence, a low hum began to rise. Not from the earth. Not from the wind. From everything. From nothing. The old man stood alone in the ruins, his breath shallow, his pulse hammering against the walls of his ribs. His hands trembled, not from age, but from the weight of understanding. He traced the carvings on the stone before him, symbols so intricate, so deliberate, that they could not have been made by human hands. This was not the work of kings or slaves. This was something older. Something absolute. The hum grew louder. His lips parted, a name forming on his tongue, a name he did not know, yet had always known. The sky split. A crack, like a wound torn into the very fabric of existence, jagged and seething with light that burned the air itself. He staggered back, shielding his eyes, but it was useless. The light was inside him now, in his bones, in his blood. It filled his mind with visions, endless spirals of galaxies, vast cities carved into planets of gold, a throne that stretched beyond the edges of time itself. And then, the voice. Not sound, not words, but command. A knowing. It was never theirs to build. It was never yours to own. The blueprint was written before the first breath, before the first thought. Before the first lie. He fell to his knees, choking on the weight of it, the unbearable truth. The stories they had told, of gods, of creation, of destiny, had all been fragments. Half-truths. Echoes of something far greater, something incomprehensible. The Anunnaki had not shaped the world. They had written its code. And now, they were rewriting it. The glitch happened at exactly 3:33 a.m. A breath caught in his throat. A hesitation in the air itself. The walls flickered, just for a fraction of a second, just long enough for him to see it. Not cracks. Not shadows. Code. A lattice of shifting, glowing patterns veined through the fabric of his bedroom, warping the edges of his vision. His pulse hammered. It was impossible, absurd, yet undeniable. He wasn't dreaming. He wasn't hallucinating. He was seeing through the lie. The hum started low, vibrating beneath his skin, crawling into the roots of his teeth. A whisper without a voice. A presence without a shape. The feeling that something vast, something ancient, was watching. Waiting. His phone screen lit up, though he hadn't touched it. The numbers on the clock distorted, symbols flickering between them. Not numbers at all. Something else. Something unreadable. Something speaking to him in a language older than time. Then the message appeared. You were never meant to see this. His breath hitched. He wanted to move, to scream, but his body refused. The air had weight, pressing down, wrapping around his ribs like invisible hands. Then, the world snapped back. The walls solidified. The air was normal again. His phone was blank. The hum was gone. But he knew. He knew now. Nothing was real. Or rather, nothing was what it seemed. The streets outside, the people walking beneath neon-lit billboards, the skyscrapers stabbing into the heavens, it was all a construct. A beautifully designed illusion, a symphony of light and matter masquerading as reality. And somewhere beyond the pixels of this world, beyond the coded fabric of existence, they were watching. The Anunnaki. Not gods. Not myth. Architects. Programmers. The original engineers of this vast and elegant deception. And now, they knew he had seen through it. The candle burned low, wax pooling like blood across the ancient wood. The air was thick, heavy, humming with a presence unseen but felt in the bones. The old man's voice trembled as he whispered, fingers tracing symbols into the dust-covered floor. The woman sitting across from him barely breathed. She wasn't sure she could. Not with the weight pressing down on her chest, not with the invisible force tightening around the room like a silent scream trapped in the walls. Then, the temperature dropped. Not gradually. Not like a cool breeze creeping in through a crack in the window. No. This was something else. A void. An absence of warmth, of time, of everything. The candle's flame flickered, stretched unnaturally, then bent sideways as if something unseen was exhaling against it. The old man stiffened. His lips parted, but no sound escaped. His pupils dilated, expanding until his irises were swallowed by blackness. And then, a whisper. Not from him. Not from her. From everywhere. Not words, but knowledge itself, crawling into her skull, flooding her thoughts with a tidal wave of images, sounds, emotions that did not belong to her. A war. Not of men, but of gods. The sky torn open, golden chariots crashing in flames, the ground splitting beneath the weight of something colossal, something beyond comprehension. A betrayal. A hand reaching into the heavens, a voice cursing in a language older than stars, a promise made in fire and blood. A secret. Buried beneath sand and stone, beneath time itself, waiting. Watching. Her body convulsed. She felt her lips moving, speaking words she did not understand, her voice layering over itself, becoming something else. The old man gasped. He knew. She had touched the Akashic records. And now, they were touching her back. The mirror rippled. Not like water, not like glass shattering, but like something alive had been disturbed. For a split second, the reflection on its surface did not match reality. The woman staring into it wasn't alone. Another version of her stood just behind her shoulder, silent, still, eyes black as the void. Her breath caught in her throat. The room around her flickered. No, not the room, reality itself. A low hum filled the air, rattling the bones inside her skin. The sound wasn't coming from the mirror. It was coming from everywhere. From the walls, from the floor, from the spaces between the atoms of her own body. Something was watching. Not from this world. Not from this timeline. The air pressed against her, thick and suffocating. Her knees buckled, her vision swam, and for one agonizing second, she knew. She was being pulled. Not by hands. Not by gravity. By something older. Something that had been waiting. Waiting for her to see. The silence was unnatural. It wasn't the absence of noise, it was the kind of silence that pressed against the skin, crawling under it like a living thing. The air itself felt wrong, thick, charged with something unseen. And then came the whispers. Not with sound. Not with words. They bled into the mind like ink spreading through water, twisting thoughts, reshaping them. They spoke of things never meant to be known. Of gods that were not gods. Of creators who had bound their own creations in chains they could not see. Something ancient was stirring. Something that had been watching. Waiting. The whispers sharpened, turning into thoughts that were not her own. Flashes of symbols, of faces that did not belong to this world. A memory that was not a memory, because it had never been hers. But she remembered. She remembered standing beneath twin suns that had not risen over Earth. She remembered the weight of chains that had never touched her wrists. She remembered voices speaking in a tongue no human should know, yet she understood every word. They were coming back. No. They had never left. The sky split open. Not with light. Not with fire. With knowing. Every atom of existence shuddered as something ancient bled through the fabric of reality. It wasn't an invasion. It wasn't an arrival. It was a remembrance, a fragment of a truth too vast, too terrible, too divine to exist within the fragile minds of those who had forgotten. And yet, the memory surged forward. It crashed through flesh and bone like a silent scream, rewriting what it meant to be human. The stars pulsed, their light older than time, their whispers vibrating in the marrow of those who dared to listen. They had left something behind. Something that had never been lost, only hidden, buried beneath the weight of constructed lies, beneath the carefully woven illusion of mortality. Hands trembled as they reached out, grasping at nothing and everything at once. The knowledge was there, just beyond the veil, waiting to be reclaimed. Waiting to be awakened. The gods had never abandoned their creation. They had left a spark. A key. A code buried within the essence of humanity itself. And now, it was stirring.